spring lecture series, and I see so many familiar faces, but I see some new faces as well, so I want to tell you a little bit about our program for this semester. As you know, for the past how many years we've been having lectures, movies, all different types of events. We just did a kind of a accounting for it, and it's turned out that we've done nearly 600 events in the last 40 years at the Armenian Studies program. So this has really brought an opportunity for you in the community to come to campus, to get familiar with the campus, to listen to some of our guest speakers, and to become familiar with our program. I just want to tell you a little bit about what's coming up in the month of February, because we have quite a few events coming up in the next couple of weeks. So 1 week from tonight, on February the 7th, we're going to have a guest speaker from the University of California, Irvine, Dr. Talin Suciayn, and she's going to talk about the development of the Western Armenian language, how it became used in Istanbul, Constantinople, and Western Armenians. She's written a new book about it, and so she'll be presenting that book. I do want to tell you that when you're reading our announcements and online or Facebook, you have to pay attention to where the event is going to be taking place, because we're going to be moving a little bit this semester more than we usually do. It's going to be on campus, but it's going to be on a different location, so just to let you know that. On Friday, February the 21st, which is 3 weeks from tonight, we're having our third or fourth short Armenian film festival, meaning that we show Armenian films, and that's going to be at the Cineculture Friday night event that starts at 5:30 p.m. and it's in the Peters Educational Center building, which is the one in the Save Mart Center. So when you come on Woodrow Avenue, there's the entrance to the gym. It says Recreation Center, but the event is there. And we're doing this with AGBU Arts in New York and the AGBU Greater Fresno chapter and the Armenian Studies program. Cineculture, we're bringing you 6 short films. It'll be about an hour and 15-minute program, and we plan to bring about 2 of the directors who will be able to discuss it with you afterwards. They have a discussion. It's one of our big events. We get close to 300 people, so if you come that evening, come early. Friday nights, you don't have to pay for parking. So you can park pretty much in any area near our venues, because the university is not charging for parking Friday evenings, Saturdays, and Sundays. So that takes us to February 21st, and then 1 week after that, on February 28th, Dr. Suciayn will be giving the second lecture in her 3-part series of lectures on Armenian family archives, and so we'll be announcing that as well. And then we have many more events coming throughout the rest of the semester. So if you're interested in getting on our e-blast, see me afterwards, and I can get your email, and I can put you on a weekly email blast that we do for Armenian Studies that tells all the activities that are happening. You can also follow us on Facebook, Instagram, and then on our website. So there's really a lot of ways for you to know what's happening in our program. All right, so this evening, I have the pleasure of first introducing my colleague, Dr. David Zakarian, who is the new Haig and Isabel Berberian Professor of Armenian Studies, and he is going to be introducing our guest speaker tonight, Dr. Zakarian.
Thank you very much, Barlow. I'm already 1 semester old here, so it is my greatest pleasure to introduce our today's speaker. So Dr. Talin Suciayn is our visiting Kazan Professor of Armenian Studies for this semester, and as Professor Barlow mentioned, she's going to give 3 lectures on the different topics related to the Armenian presence in the Ottoman Empire and in modern-day Turkey. Dr. Suciayn was born and raised in Constantinople, in Istanbul. As someone with Greek origin, I tend to use Constantinople more often than Istanbul, I'm afraid. She studied at the University of Istanbul and then moved to Germany, to Munich, where she obtained her PhD. And she has been teaching there at the Institute of Middle Eastern Studies for 15 years. And she has been researching the presence of Armenians in the Mediterranean, in the Near East and Middle East. Dr. Suciayn has published 2 books, one in 2016 entitled The Armenians in Modern Turkey, Post-Genocide Society, History and Politics, and her second book came out in 2023, entitled Outcasting Armenians, Tanzimat of the Provinces. So, as I mentioned, this is the first lecture in a series of 3, so I hope you will be able to attend all the other lectures and all the other events that Professor Barlow mentioned. So without any further ado, I would like to us to welcome Dr. Suciayn.
Thank you very much. I'm honored to be the Kazan Visiting Professor of Armenian Studies at Fresno State University, and I thank the university, the esteemed faculty members, and the supportive and engaged Armenian community of Fresno. This lecture series will concentrate on family archives, as David and Barlow mentioned, and family archives of survivors of Armenian genocide. It will primarily utilize a largely untapped and overlooked source, correspondences kept by dispersed Armenian families. The correspondences that we presented here fall into 3 categories: letters written by survivors, postcards derived from one of the largest known collections on Ottoman Armenian villages and towns, and letters dated prior to 1915, which carry traces of the approaching catastrophe. So these are the visuals from Surpik's letters that we're going to talk about. These letters were found in Philadelphia by Talin Suciayn, written by a widowed woman, Sırpuhi or Surpik Tekyan, in the fall of 1922 from Constantinople, Istanbul, right before the takeover by the Kemalist forces. Paul and I began working on Surpik Tekyan's letters remotely during the COVID years, when almost nothing was allowed to be done together. On the one hand, Surpik's letters saved us in the days of pain, and on the other, they brought into the present a time of grief, longing, loneliness, loss, and survival. In a way, the feelings of both periods, fall 1922 and the COVID years, had a certain similarity in terms of emotions at least, when millions of people were dying and many families could not even mourn their loved ones or be with them on their last journey. Sırpuhi Papazyan Tekyan was an Armenian Catholic of Angora, a city whose Armenian population was approximately 6% Catholic, including the Tekyans. According to the Armenian Patriarchate census of 1915, the Armenian population of Angora numbered almost 11,000 people, with approximately 7,000 of them Catholic. This is one of the pics from the Armenian district of Angora. Angora, as you may know, today is Ankara. Surpik Tekyan shared a common destiny with many others who were born in those years, so that her date of birth varied document to another. In later life abroad, various records give Surpik's year of birth as anywhere between 1871 and 1875. However, a rare surviving record of baptism has come in recent years that lists Surpik's baptism date as December 6, 1868, or December 18 in Gregorian calendar. Based on the baptism record, Surpik was the oldest of 7 children. Nothing more is known about 4 of them. Surpik was married in her later teen years to Bedros Tekyan, another Armenian Catholic of Angora. She gave birth to 9 children, of which 6 survived to adulthood. Their first children were daughters, Luisa and Marie. Yes, here they are. Luisa and Marie, born 1888 and 1890, followed by the elder son Rob and Ohannes. Her last 2 children were a son Artin, born 1900, and daughter Takuhi, born in April 1905. Surpik's husband, Bedros, was said to have been a prosperous man who died in 1914 while out collecting grants. A family story states he might have had a heart attack. However, it seems his older daughter spoke of families. Takuhi, who had been a young girl at the later years, would insist that her father had been murdered, leaving a lasting mystery as to what actually happened to Bedros. In 1915, Angora's Apostolic Armenians were the first ones in town to be arrested, stripped out of their valuables, and sent away to be killed. At the end of August 1915, after the Armenian Catholic community of Angora rejected a request to convert to Islam, their men were arrested and deported to the province of Adana. Most of the Catholic women and children likely found opportunities to escape. For the following year, all Armenian churches of Angora were destroyed, along with much of the Armenian neighborhood during the Great Fire of Angora 1916, which was similar to the Great Fire of Smyrna, claimed to have purposefully been set to target the Armenian quarter, following it being mostly emptied by the deportations. How Surpik and her family survived has been lost to the silence of the survivor, as like for many others, it was a painful memory they did not discuss. Surpik's daughter, Marie's husband, died in the Balkan Wars in 1913. A year after Surpik's husband died, in order to support the family, Marie went to Istanbul as a migrant worker, finding a work as a seamstress for a wealthy Turkish family. It was perhaps her being there first that assisted her family in getting established in Istanbul after fleeing Angora. In the summer of 1922, Surpik had a plan. She and her children had survived the genocide, but that was not enough. It was Surpik and no one else who would guarantee the future of the family by thinking and acting on what she knew was best for each and every child she had. Surpik's eldest daughter, Luisa, was among the young women who went abroad for marriage. Luisa's husband, Benjamin, had a twin brother, Rupen, so it was decided Rupen would sponsor her widowed sister, Marie, to be his wife. Rupen sent her a first-class ticket on the ocean liner SS Constantinople, which sailed between Istanbul and New York. However, Surpik had different ideas. These are pictures taken from the ocean liner before leaving the city. Takuhi? Yes, here, Takuhi is this one. Takuhi, Surpik's youngest daughter, then a 17-year-old, living in the capital, had an Armenian boyfriend, Noray, that you see next to her, of whom Surpik did not approve. Takuhi was different from her sisters, both in temperament and because her formative years were spent in Istanbul rather than Angora. Despite the family's financially precarious situation, being a young girl, Takuhi seemed to have lived mostly isolated from such concerns. She described her formative years in Istanbul fondly, during which she attended a Catholic French school, was a member of the Armenian Scouting movement, played musical instruments, acted on stage, and was an avid tennis player. Takuhi's independence was in stark contrast to the expectations of her mother. Surpik took the wheel of fortune in her hands, and Marie traded in her ticket for two in steerage in order to take Takuhi with her. Takuhi was reluctant to leave this life behind for an unknown country, but she had no choice in the matter. Hence, Surpik had already managed to send all three daughters to America in July 1922, before the defeat of Greek army in August same year, which was to change the lives of those who survived the genocide and could not go anywhere else. And here they are having last days, and then this is a picture with this note at the back. Surpik's letters start in September 1922, 2 months after sending her daughters to America. Her letters afford a direct look into the life of daily life in a time when the surviving Armenian community was facing an institutional and social crisis, leading to a massive wave of Armenian emigration by the end of 1922. That year, Surpik and her family were living as by Madame Lucie Kolos at 4 Rue Bekar, Bekar Sokak, today off Istiklal Avenue, in the Pera district on the European side of the city. In her letters, Surpik describes various engagements and weddings. In fact, Istanbul was so a record number of marriages at this time. Istanbul was flooded by displaced survivor Armenians, and after so much loss, they were in the process of starting new lives. We get insight into the phenomenon in Hagop Mansouri's novella, Yegort Anusmutyuna, The Second Marriage, who wrote, and I quote, "By the end of the war, marriages in Istanbul increased suddenly. It was an unprecedented situation, an occurrence resulting from the new conditions and new circumstances at hand. Even the children would remember those days. All the city's kaftagayans, communal housing for displaced people, churchyards and schools were full of kaftagans, perpetual exiles. All of them women and more or less at the age of marriage. The Istanbul Armenians also wanted their daughters to get married. Some got married in Istanbul, while some were sent to foreign countries. Some got, known and unknown places as far as the USA, which had the largest consumer market. In those years, all the villagers, Armenians of the provinces, who had lost their husbands, were getting remarried, motivating each other, imitating each other." End of quote. Surpik's strategy to trade the ticket to send two of her daughters to America was definitely a survival strategy that she developed instantly, thinking that sending them to America to marry was not only going to save their lives, but also guarantee their lives after survival, something that she herself did not have anymore. Therefore, in her letters to her daughters, now in the United States, she reminds them that there are many other Armenian women back in the old country who would like to be in their place. She wrote, and I quote, "The girls who receive your good news of marriage abroad and said they would never leave, now are competing with each other to find good guys abroad to marry. If there are good guys to be found in America, let me know, as there are good girls here for matchmaking to get them out." Without realizing it, Surpik's daughters had escaped just in time, and now she was telling them it was their duty to use their position to help others. Arranged marriages, especially ones to Armenian men in America, continue to be lifesavers for the survivors for generations to come. We also gain insight into the daily life of a survivor in Istanbul at this time from Surpik's account. She writes of her daily routine, and I quote, "I wake up in the early morning, we drink coffee, and Artin, her son, leaves. I sit in front of the window and think, and then urge myself not to think because it's useless. We are staying in Madame Lucine, and I go to liturgy and Sunday Mass, and then I go to the market and cook, and sometimes when I want to go to Filu or Sima's house, and sometimes they come to me. Sometimes I go to the Armenian cemetery, and sometimes your uncle's wife comes to visit. Some days nobody comes and nobody goes, and I sit until 10 o'clock when Artin comes home and we eat." End of quote. Surpik's very insightful description reveals her routine and mindset. Having grown up in Istanbul myself, Surpik's routine is very familiar to me, despite having taken place decades earlier. I remember from my own childhood elderly Armenian women renting rooms or one part of an apartment, something that I never reflected upon. Just like Surpik, these elderly women would very often sit in front of the window and think an image that resonates with me. They never spoke or shared their thoughts and sorrows, living almost in a separate world that only they could relate to, while we children never paid attention or asked questions about their silence. There was one more important thing that would become part of Surpik's daily routine after September 1922, and for a long time to come, checking for letters and postcards. In her first letter, Surpik related how she would constantly check for her daughter's postcards and letters, and when one arrived, she would excitedly gather the extended family to read together. In the third letter, Surpik gives an indirect order to the girls to write more often, devising a system in which one of them would send a letter a week. This was so they won't have to be bothered to write too often, but also that she won't be staying there without letters. Letters were an important lifeline for Surpik, as they served as the only connection to her beloved daughters, comforted her in her loneliness without them, and reassured her that they were doing okay in that unknown land. Responding to the question of her daughters how she was coping with loneliness, Surpik wrote, and I quote, "You ask me whether I'm doing okay on my own. One would say, even if you go to heaven alone, it wouldn't be enjoyable. Sometimes I feel depressed, sometimes I force myself to feel lighter." During the years of Mudros armistice following the end of the World War I, Armenians organized an empire-wide relief effort which allowed Armenian survivors to return to their villages, reclaim family members from captivity, and start to rebuild their lives at home despite the radically changed landscape there. As the Ottoman Empire had been defeated, it was the presence of the Allied powers in Istanbul which made the relief work possible in the first place. With the defeat of Greece and the retreat of the Allies, another genocidal fervor filled the vacuum. Surpik refers to this situation as, in Turkish, orta karıştı, all hell broke loose. Indeed, everything was being turned upside down for the remaining Christians. Surpik's daughters in America were unaware of how drastically the situation has deteriorated in Istanbul, especially for Christians like themselves, and Takuhi had written to her mother of plans to return to Istanbul at some point. Surpik's reply reveals to her daughter what was happened since she left, and I quote, "You wrote you want to return to Istanbul. Never think about that. Here there is no taste anymore. At this point, your place is there," end of quote. Surpik first mentions people leaving Istanbul to escape the situation in her second letter, noting a certain Nektar's family was heading to Paris. This reference seems innocuous enough. However, in the next letter, someone she called the elder bride and her relatives were also leaving for Paris. By her last letter a month later, it seems almost everyone around Surpik has left for France or were making immediate plans to do so. In fact, the last letter Surpik makes a sudden but matter-of-fact reference to her own inevitable departure. Despite saying she lacked the means to leave, Surpik is suddenly discussing a future abroad as if continuing to live in Istanbul was so impossible, a proposition that could not even be considered. Surpik doesn't hold back about the desperation of the moment. And I quote, "If you ask how things here are, day by day, everything gets more and more expensive. Everybody wants to leave." Of another marriage, who left for Marseille immediately afterwards. She reports that Nektar's family had reached Paris and that a Tekyan uncle had followed with his family. Their paternal aunt, Anita, who had been mentioned as coming and going with Surpik over the course of the letters, was also announced to be leaving in that very week, having already given away all her belongings in preparation. Other families are also mentioned to be leaving for Paris, and she discusses one person's success in getting a passport issued. I think here we need to see this one, yes. While she did not say what type of passport, it was likely an Armenian one obtained through the embassy of the defunct Republic of Armenia, where Mateos Ebligatyan was still actively issuing passports for Armenians looking to leave. Coincidentally, it appears that the very day Surpik wrote this letter, December 10, was the day Ebligatyan ordered a ship incognito to escape Turkey, along with the Armenian Patriarch himself, as they had been under extreme pressure from Kemalists. With the Lausanne Conference underway and the Allied powers faltering, it had quickly become apparent that Armenia would no longer be safe in Turkey. Patriarch Zaven described in his memoirs as follows the situation, and I quote: "After October 1922, masses of our people were leaving Turkey in a state of terror. These people, bewildered in their struggle for physical and economic survival, were unable to do anything, and almost the entire nation scattered to various parts of the world, like dust carried by the wind." End of quote. Near the end of the last letter, Surpik laments the situation through an idiom saying, "Which one shall I count?" expressing the impossibility to keeping track of all people who had left. There was still the matter of her sons, however. While Surpik was able to advise and largely direct her daughters' lives when they lived with her, as a woman, she could not do the same with her sons. That would have been her husband's position had he been alive, but there were also more complicated demands on them emanating from beyond family. In the last letter of the collection, Surpik confesses a fear which also hints at the situation in mothers. And I quote: "I want to send Ohannes and Artin to Marseille because they can be drafted to the military. They are very afraid of that. Recently, Ohannes visited us and said, 'Let's sell everything we have and go to Marseille.' Well, what do we have that we could sell? So I didn't agree. It would be good if they had the opportunity, but there's no way." End of quote. This fear was based in recent history. After the First World War I mobilization order, many young Armenian men, including Surpik's eldest son Hagop, had been drafted into Ottoman army and disappeared. Many Armenians were put into special units titled labor battalions, which made them easy to find and annihilate. At this point, Surpik likely still believed Hagop to be one of those murdered. But in fact, he had escaped and went into hiding in Egypt, only reconnecting with his family abroad once he felt it was safe enough. Surpik knew the situation could repeat itself with her two remaining sons, adding to her worries on top of the unemployment, economic crisis, and aftermath of the war. While Surpik doesn't write explicitly about the numerous issues and dangers she was no doubt witnessing around her deathfall, we continue to get hints here and there about the unprecedented problems. She tells of troubles with the living quarters she was renting, how the roof was leaking. She hoped to renovate it and count the repairs against her rent, but she was told by the owner she couldn't because it was not the time to renovate. I quote: "For the time being we are living in it. I went to the notary with Madame Lucie to ask, I'm planning to renovate the house, but the landlord isn't permitting it. I'm going to renovate it and count that against the rent. Is it my right to do so? Once you write a personal petition, you'll get the right. You get it renovated, and you can reduce it from your rent. We were planning to do it, but things are now complicated. The landlord's siblings say it is not the time to renovate. However, it's going to leak again, but there's nothing we can do. For this year, we'll live here and see. Unable to do anything, Surpik was forced to resign herself to the situation, knowing that the roof would continue leaking. Though she was describing her residence's physical condition, it could also be seen as symbolic of the situation in Turkey. She was living in a house that could not be repaired. The war between Greece and the Kemalists ended by the end of August 1922, which was followed by the Great Fire of Smyrna. The next historical turning point awaiting Asia Minor Christians soon followed, an agreement between Kemalists and Greece to exile Asia Minor Greeks to Greece, approximately 1.5 million or 1,300,000 Greeks, and 350,000 Muslims from Greece to Turkey. This was utilized as another opportunity to be rid of the remaining Armenians too, with tens of thousands of them exiled with the Greeks. At such a moment of uncertainty, Surpik's landlord did not want to make the investment to repair the house. In the months to come, it became clear that the only fix was to leave the home for good by going into permanent exile. When exactly Surpik left Istanbul is not clear, but we know that her sons reached France by January 1923, just a month after the last letter. We were able to learn this thanks to the ongoing digitization project of almost 20,000 passport applications made to the representative of the Armenian delegation in Marseille by newly arrived exiles held in the Armenian Revolutionary Federation archives in Watertown, Massachusetts. The majority are still in the process of being scanned and transcribed. However, those made available online, and as more become available, it could be possible to identify others mentioned as living in Surpik's letters, and perhaps Surpik herself. Though Surpik escaped Istanbul, her plan to reunite in America with her daughters was put on hold by a new change in US law that severely restricted immigration. Thanks to her daughter Takuhi receiving US citizenship through her husband, Surpik became a mother of a citizen, which gave her a special status under the law that most aspiring immigrants did not have and made her eligible to immigrate. Finally, in March 1930, she was able to board a Grand Ocean liner and sail to America. She reunited with her daughters, who she had not seen in almost a decade, while this time her sons were the ones left behind. Just as Surpik had been left behind many times before, now it was their turn, as the life of a Kaftagan is one of constant separation. Upon their reunion, the three sisters happily took photos together with their mother and welcomed her into the family circle that now included 7 American grandchildren. Perhaps emblematic of her Kaftagan existence, Surpik never did have a home of her own in America. Instead, each daughter took a turn hosting her in their home for 4 months of the year. Living in each of their houses, Surpik got to know her grandchildren well and helped to raise them. Her travels had not quite finished yet either, because though in 1938 she was about to turn to 70, she returned to Paris to see her sons one last time. Her request to travel had listed their 3 names as Artin, Jean Hovannes, and Jacques Hagop. However, Hagop's name was crossed out, indicating his premature death before she arrived. Surpik also saw her sister Sima there, who was making plans to join her own daughter in the United States. Surpik returned to New York in May 1939, just in time as fate would intervene once again when just a few months later World War II erupted. The United States entered the war after the attack on Pearl Harbor in December 1941, and the ocean liners that had brought immigrants to a new life were now sending American troops, including Surpik's grandsons, into the other direction to war. They survived, but not without much tribulation and the psychological scars of war. It wasn't until after the war, in 1946, that Sima was finally able to leave for America, traveling with the help of a nonsense passport for stateless people. She passed away in Boston less than 2 years later. Surpik also suffered yet again during these years of war. Seeing off her grandsons to fight in it must have brought back fears of her own sons from World War I. Around 1943, she suffered a debilitating stroke that paralyzed her on one side of her body and took away her ability to speak. She endured this state for the last 15 years of her life, trying to remain as active as she could. Despite her disabilities, she continued to play a role within the family she was instrumental in establishing up until her death, November 1957, before she would have turned 89 years old. Surpik, like many other Armenians, wrote in Armeno-Turkish, which is Turkish written in the Armenian alphabet. She had a beautiful and consistent handwriting and writing style. She had a very indirect way of expressing herself, using many idioms, some of which have now disappeared from the Turkish language, often hinting rather than writing directly, something very specific to her culture and time. Her letters in the trunk from one house to another waited for over 100 years until someone in the family was ready to reveal what it meant to be an Armenian survivor, a woman, a mother, and the central pillar of a family after the genocide. Thank you very much for your attention.